Welcome to Simply Sacred with Aurora Leigh. Today I am here with guest Nicholas Kusmich. He is an interesting fellow residing here in Kelowna, BC in the Okanagan Valley, and I had the pleasure of meeting Nicholas at a really neat community event and was inspired so much by his wisdom that brought him into the studio so that you can all benefit from it as well. So in this episode, you'll see themes of meta-awareness, healing, wellness, and beyond. And I'm just really inspired and happy to have you on today, Nicholas. Yeah, so it's so great to be here with you, Nicholas. And will you just introduce yourself for the audience?
Sure.
And how you want to?
Yeah, well, like I was saying, it's kind of a loaded question. But I like to say that, well, I'm Nicholas Kusmich. And I like to say that I am a husband first, a father second, and a business owner third. For 14 years of my early life, I was a pastor. For 14 years after that, I had my own marketing agency. And now starting, as of the last few years, moving into more of a transformative personal development, self-help type space. So I had a lot of experience with a lot of different people, but I feel like life has dished me a very interesting path to walk, and as a result of that, I feel like I'm older than my age and had some great experiences. But yes, now I live here in beautiful Kelowna and sharing some good things about how people can look at life maybe a little bit differently.
Nice. I'm glad that you're in the wellness space, hence why you're invited here. And we're talking all things wellness. So
right.
You said life dished you a certain path. And so I'm curious about what that means to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess we all at some point have an idea of what a perfect life is, right? If we just have this, that, and the other. I remember one of my earliest childhood memories was I was about 4 years old. It was a Saturday morning. I was watching morning cartoons, and my father fell to his knees beside me and started screaming. I didn't quite know what was going on at the time. My mom, fortunately, was around and dialed 911, and paramedics were there within minutes and took him to the hospital. And what I didn't realize was happening was I was watching my father have his first heart attack. And that was the beginning of spending a good amount of time in hospital. In fact, so much so that when I was 16, we were in the emergency room after another situation had happened. And I was talking to the cardiac specialist at the time. And we were just bantering back and forth. And he turns to me and says, "So where do you practice medicine?" I said, "What do you mean practice? I'm 16 years old. I'm in high school." And he goes, "How'd you know all this stuff that we were talking about?" And it was just because I had spent so much time in hospital throughout the years, like growing up, that I could hold my own with a cardiac surgeon. And so between my father's health, which was something that I had to deal with until I was 19 and I lost him after his third stroke, to being in a marriage that ended up very, very bad. I remember I was quite young at the time, but I was sitting in my office late at night. I was an entrepreneur, so I was working late into the night. And my wife at the time walks into the door frame, but just stops, like doesn't fully walk in, but just stops at the door frame, like there's this weird energy, and kind of like crunches up in fetal and says, "Nick, we need to talk." And that's usually not a good sign when a conversation starts like that. Said, "Nick, we need to talk." And I said, "Sure, what's up?" Like trying to play it cool. And she says, "I want you to know that while we were dating and in the 3 years of our marriage so far, I've been unfaithful to you." And I said, "Okay." And of course, all this stuff is running through my mind, and I respond in the only way I knew how, which was probably the worst question I could ask at the time. And so I said, "Well, with who?" And at the time, I was young. I was a pastor of a church. And she started listing names of people in my church, people on my board of directors, leaders, people I knew, and just a laundry list. And so in that very moment, I'm just running through my mind, like, what did I do to deserve this? Did I see something wrong? How did I not see this? Why am I so dumb? Why, like, just, you know, the stories that start to go on. And so that ended up turning into a very ugly divorce. A lot of people got involved. Keep in mind now, the context is I'm a young pastor at the time as well. So that adds a whole bunch of layers of narratives of, you shouldn't get divorced, you should work it. There's just so much stuff going on. Half the church turned their back on me and said, this is probably your fault anyways. The other half was there to support me. I ended up stepping out of that role, of course. But through the ugliness of that divorce, I found myself homeless. And keep in mind, I don't mean sleeping on the street, but through that process, I decided to let go of my house and everything. She took everything. Our parents got involved. It became this sticky lawyer battle kind of thing. And I just said, I don't want any part of this. I'll just walk away. And so I'm couch surfing and trying to find myself and figure myself out and see who's a friend and who's a foe. And, you know, I'm still trying to get involved in business and pay the bills. And it's almost like everything it's like I had this battle with Murphy's Law that says everything that could go wrong does go wrong. And I was like, yeah, okay, I am a living example of Murphy's Law. So between the losing of my father, between this thing happening, between my businesses going down, between me remortgaging the house before, my parents' house before that, and investing at things that ended up being scams and losing money there, I had my bout with Murphy's Law and with the humbling hand of the universe sometimes. And so I had to navigate all that at a young age. Now, fortunately, I came out the other end, and things are very good now, and I managed to sort all that out. But I do feel like that gave me an interesting perspective on life.
Was there a turning point of surrender you kind of came to amidst all that kind of pressure?
I love that question.
Betrayal trauma. Like, that wasn't just your wife at the time, but that was also colleagues. That was like betrayal of multiple sources.
Yeah, and what also felt like a betrayal from God as a pastor, because I'm like making deals with the divine saying, hey, my dad is sick, like help me out here, and I'm doing your work, and why is this all happening? So yes, betrayal on many, many levels.
You were in the pressure cooker.
If there's something stronger than a pressure cooker, I was in that too.
The Instant Pot. Just kidding.
Yeah, the ninja. But yeah, you bring up an interesting term, like this idea of like at some point did you surrender? I have come to learn that at least back then, like I was stubborn, and it's not as though life did not provide me hints along the way. I think it just sometimes life like starts with a little poke, maybe not even a poke. It starts with a whisper, and then sees if you're paying attention, and then that whisper turns into a poke, and the poke turns into a flick, and a flick turns into a push, and a push turns into a harder push, and then a punch in the face. And I say this obviously metaphorically, where just the world's trying to get your attention. And I think for whatever reason, I just had to go through all of that to finally get to the point where I'm like, okay, I allow. I raise my hands and I allow whatever this is to be, and to allow it to reorient my life, and to allow it to have me reconsider and renegotiate what is important, and approach life in a brand new way.
So what was it? What was it that was reorienting?
I think it was multiple things. One of the things I think early on was, from a very young age, I felt like instead of Murphy's Law, I had the Midas touch. I was a young kid in elementary school, a school that went up to 9th grade. In the 7th grade, I was a student body president. Grades came easily to me. You know, it seemed like even when I played sports, my first year playing sports, I was the MVP of the little itty bitty softball 6-year-olds. Like, it felt like in the early days, life was unfolding very easily. And I think what happened was I let it get to my head. And I thought, oh, I'm unstoppable. Right. It's all me. There's no one else involved in this. Like, look what I can do. And so I think one of the things that had to be reoriented was reorienting my place in the universe, from the king of the universe in my own little mind to realizing universe is a really big place, and we all have our little roles to play, and so that was one reorientation.
So your ego was transforming.
I was first starting to realize that I had such a thing as an ego, and when I say ego, I mean the dual-fold nature of the hubris, like a true egotistical ego, but also this thing that I would call the self or the identity. Yes, that part had to find its place in the bigger scheme of things.
I like how you situate that. So I have a burning question. So you were a pastor, so you would have been Christian?
Correct.
And then when I kind of tap into some of your work, which I mean, you were the only person I've ever gone through the clickbait funnel kind of process and actually purchase something.
Yes, that's right.
Have
back in the marketing days, yeah.
You have quite the wisdom to share, and I mean, it's there, and it's potent, and it's real. Like, so I did buy your stuff, and quite gratefully. So it was interesting to have seen you talking, and then it wasn't until after you said you'd come on the show that I realized it was you, right?
Wow.
But my question is, after seeing some of your work, it's very Eastern philosophy based. So was there a transition from Christianity to more Buddhist or Taoist principles?
So here's what I found interesting, and I want to be careful not to align myself with any particular belief, because I don't want it to, that's where people get into a little bit of battles, right? Faith versus faith, belief versus belief. The interesting thing I think I found was, like, people will ask me, even to this day, knowing that, I had a background as a pastor, like, are you still a believer? And I have to very much clarify, what is that question actually, like, what are you really asking? Because that term can be thrown around very loosely. On one hand, I would say that I'm more of a believer now than I ever have been. And the experiential aspect of the God of the Bible that I had read about for so long feels more real now than it did before. But admittingly, it may not look like what could look like institutionalized Christian faith. So I just want to lob that out there. But then as I had an experience, which we can go into if we need to. But through that experience, I felt like I had a true embodied experience with God. And I put God in quotes because I think now science might call that term the quantum field. The Hindus might call that Brahman, the Taoists might call it Tao, and Christians might call it God. There's different terms. But in my understanding, I had an experience, a deeply embodied experience with God. And it kind of shifted everything for me, because it's like, wow, I'd been studying God and I'd been representing God behind a pulpit for so many years. And this experience just shook me to the core. And I knew that I wasn't the first person on the planet to have an experience like this. And so I started to study and I started to search for answers, both from a neuroscientific standpoint, like what is actually happening in my nervous system and my brain that had this experience, and simultaneously, are there other faith practices or indigenous cultures or anybody who can bring some narrative to what I had experienced? And in my study, if you will, I started to recognize that many of the mystic sects of all these various faith groups, so the mystic sect of Islam is Sufism, for example, and there's Christian mystics, and there's a form of that in Judaism, and many versions of that in Buddhism and Hinduism. And when I started to realize that there was a very common vernacular used amongst the mystics, and so what I started to realize, at least for me personally, that each of these angles was a different description of the same thing I was experiencing. So Sufism is a very romantic language, like Rumi when he talks about God. It's very the love of my heart and my soul. It's very beautiful. The Christian mystics speak a lot of grace and kind of like this mysticism brought and I'm like, wow, it just seems like different angles trying to express itself in whatever language was available at the time.
Yeah.
So I say all that to say, I don't necessarily connect myself with one particular Eastern tradition, but in our search for this, and I lived a week in a monastery with Buddhist monks and lamas. I spent time in Hindu temples and speak with their yogis and everyone and having these conversations. So I would say that there's many people trying to use whatever language is available to them to explain this type of experience.
Yeah. My background's cultural anthropology. I
Okay.
started with intense yoga. I've done hundreds of sweat lodges, so indigenous spirituality, like everything, because it was my research in
Sure.
my 20s. I wanted to dive into all of it.
Yes.
So I hear you. I was also curious of the similarities and the threads and the connection points and stuff. So yeah. And I mean, that's a great segue into, really curious about you have a Rewired challenge and you have this new Unbecoming course, right?
Yes, sure.
And when I heard you speaking at the kind of event here in Kelowna, you said you're doing a pivot. And
Yes.
so you've had transformation in your life, and now you're transforming your life again to talk about transformation.
Sure.
And so that's kind of the embodiment of that course. And I guess I was curious to lean a little into, what are the sources of knowledge or disciplines? Because is it interdisciplinary that you are kind of going into in your research? And
Yeah, so the path was very interesting because people say interesting path. You started as a pastor, then a marketer, and now doing transformative work. That's a weird path to take. But when you think about it in essence, it's all the same path, just different expressions. Like I was just always interested in human behavior and human transformation. And transformation from the sense of if you look out into the world, it is apparent that suffering, however you want to define that, but that suffering is prevalent. Whether that's personal suffering of people battling their internal thoughts or future-based suffering of what's going to happen when I die, or and so I got into pastoring as an attempt to bring transformation to the world through that lens. And then when I transitioned into marketing, if you will, really I wasn't interested at all in selling products. I was more interested in human behavior. It's why does someone feel like why does someone feel like they want to buy something?
yeah.
And B, why do they feel like if I buy that thing, I will be better on the other side of it? Because most of us, if we do buy anything, it is an act of transformation on some level. If I buy a pair of shoes, it's because I think I'll be more comfortable and I'll feel better in those shoes. If they buy a information product, it's because I think I'll be better on the other end. If they buy a weight loss product, it's so even if I buy a phone case, it's a representation of my character. I want people to see who I am by the design that I pick my phone case in. And so even in that, I was always just interested in transformation. It's why do people want to change and why do purchase behavior cause some of that change? And then in the midst of all that, what I had realized was, a month running these marketing campaigns and being responsible for literally billions of dollars of transactions. Part of what I was doing was also an education arm. We were teaching people and businesses how to market better. And there was this repeated pattern of two people could be in the exact same room, being given the exact same content and details, given the exact same action plan, and one would run to the stars with it and create this amazing change in their business and make so much more money and help so much more people and create all this greater impact. And then on the other hand, I would have another person who would do absolutely nothing with it. They try, but they get stuck. I said, well, that's
Mindset.
Well, that's what I was trying to figure out. That's strange. Why? Even when I was a pastor, there are two people sitting in the exact same congregation, hearing the exact same message, providing the exact same tools, exact same everything, and yet one would see this deep work happen, and the other would feel stuck despite the best intentions. It's not like they didn't want to change. It's not like they weren't doing the actions. It's not like they weren't disciplined or motivated or didn't have the right tools, but there was something stuck there.
Inner narrative.
All of it.
Yeah.
And so when all this started dawning on me, my question started to become, why? Like, what is that? Is it the inner narrative? Is it the mindset? Is it what's happening? What are the, and so when you talk about multidisciplinary actions on like how to see transformation, I started again, I lived in a Buddhist monastery in Nepal for a bit of time to talk to the lamas there because Buddhists were all about self-mind mastery. And then I spent some time with the yogis and I said, well, you're all about, like the yogic tantric culture in its purity is about transformation and elevation and showing up in your best form. And then I spent some time with the top leading neuroscientists in the world and saying, like, what's going on in the brain and in our body that's preventing some from moving forward versus others? And my conclusion and where I'm at now is the recognition that one's nervous system, and I take it a little further, I call it your neural operating system. There's 8 circuits that make up your nervous system. Mind being one of them, mindset and your default mode network being one of them. And then I started to recognize that the research and all the traditions point to the reality that like we have very little control over our thoughts. We have very little control over our actions. Our nervous system literally dictates our ability to take a risk or not. It dictates our emotional regulation. It dictates how comfortable we are speaking to new people. It dictates what actions we're willing to take. It dictates whether or not we're going to take a risk or not. It dictates the words that come out of our mouth and how we see the world. Literally, our nervous system is a filter by which we experience our reality. And one of the things I said is there's 8 billion realities on this planet, and not one of them are real, because it's all of our different perspectives. And
do you believe it's feelings, thoughts, thoughts, feelings, or thoughts, feelings, feelings, thoughts?
It's a great question. It's the chicken or the egg question, right? Is it thoughts, feelings? And one of the things I do say, though, is biology is psychology and psychology is biology, right? So when we feel something, the only way for us to actually feel it is because a neurochemical in our brain is sending a signal through our body to say, feel this thing, and then we label it. Oh, that is anger or happiness or frustration. But it's just the chemical firing in the brain. So some will say thoughts, feelings. Some will say feelings, thoughts. The interesting thing is what you notice is when they did fMRI studies, and this is more recent research, which I think is so fascinating. When they did recent research, they realized that the brain has the thought and makes the decision seconds before the mind comprehends the decision was ever made. And so they were doing these studies where they put someone in an fMRI machine and they were showing random numbers and they were saying choose the number this or this or this or this or showing a color this or this. And they were trying to register at what point does the brain say, oh, I pick blue or I pick 7 or I pick whatever. And what they started to notice was in some cases, 15, 20 seconds before someone actually cognitively made the decision, the part of the brain had already fired and made the decision for them. So is it feelings, thoughts, feeling? That's a hard, it's a hard one to say. But what I can say, and this is almost a cop-out because I don't want to commit to one or the other first, is the nervous system is thinking and feeling for us on our behalf. Like whatever is in that nervous system, and I call them imprints, but an experience that may have happened sometime in our past that has left a pattern, a residual pattern or a code in our nervous system, then creates the thoughts and the feelings for us to feel according to the pattern that was laid out for us. And so I just started to realize, oh my goodness, you know, a lot of the self-help world is saying, well, you just need to be more disciplined, and you just need to be more motivated, and you just need to press harder, or you just need a different mindset. And usually mindset means like visualizations and affirmations and incantation. I'm not saying those things are bad, and there's some neuroscience to prove that they have a benefit. But what I have found is that you can't affirm your way out of a coded nervous system that refuses to believe the affirmation.
I find it sometimes very gaslighty towards those with complex trauma.
Sure, right.
Or epigenetic trauma.
Right.
Like, why?
Oh,
you
just feel better.
Yeah, it's almost that
Yeah.
spiritual bypassing, and it can leave out a whole section of society.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. And so, and again, and I want to be very careful in using the word trauma, because although I'm trauma informed, I'm not a clinical psychiatrist or psychologist. I haven't studied the work, and so I want to be careful with how I use that term. But what we do know from a nervous system standpoint, and again, I'll call them imprints, and let's say the higher degree of an imprint, it could be more trauma-ish. Lower is less trauma-ish, but it's still something that's affecting you. And maybe I'll just use that term to keep me out of hot water, if you will.
Okay.
But what we do know is that imprints are real, and they filter that nervous system. And so to ask anybody to change a response or a feeling or a story or a whatever without dealing with the reality that there are some imprints there, it's doing a disservice.
Yeah.
And in fact, oftentimes it makes things worse, because now the person's like, oh, I can't even overcome this thing that everyone's telling me to overcome like this by looking in the mirror and saying, you got it, buddy. Like, and again, I'm not taking away.
I'm so grateful though that you're acknowledging that, right? It's refreshing, because it's not, I think, acknowledged enough.
Right.
It needs to be, yeah. Because you say the imprinting, for something might not have even developed to begin with either.
Sure.
Right? Neurodevelopmental trauma is very significant in our North American culture too. Right?
Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, so look at the Ferber baby movement.
Okay.
Do you know what that is? That's where the baby cries it out, and there was the doctor who said, let your baby cry it out. Right? So if that primal fear of a child not being responded to locks into the nervous system, and that primal fear is now that set point reality for that human being. Now as they're growing up in the world and they have anxiety and depression, and it links back to that very baseline neurodevelopmental trauma. Right? And so we're not, I think, acknowledging yet some of the socio-cultural norms that have substantiated North American culture in particular, right? Like look at the some of the motivations around, our all-American dream. We haven't reconceptualized shared values yet in our society.
That's a great
and
point.
That was a very driven, motivated force from right reason, after the Great Depression, like let's get this high productive society and values and individualism. Well, we have that now. But that's creating some offset symptomologies too. But I do think, is there something that you want to talk about that you don't always, right? Like I see your content's very driven towards like these topics, but if you want to get something kind of new out, what would it be?
Well, I think it's in line with a lot of what we're saying. Maybe I'll even take it a step further as a hypothesis for people to consider.
Okay.
And that is this idea where just as I feel like sometimes, and don't shoot the messenger, just as I feel like sometimes there is not enough consideration or trauma-informed work going on, because the self-help world might say, just think yourself out of it, or whatever. On the flip side of it, sometimes I feel like people are just saying it's all the result of a story, and so all you got to do is rewrite the story. And a lot of therapeutic work is, let's go back to the place where the story was written and let's rewrite it for you. And so you'll see in a lot of therapeutic work, people will sit down in front of a therapist, and the therapist will like take them deep into like these experiences that they had when they were younger or whatever, and essentially revoke the emotional experience so it comes top of mind, and then try to rewrite that story somehow and say, oh, maybe it wasn't this way, it was this way. Or maybe if you saw it this way, it would be that way, or however they're trying to do that. And I think there's some power in that. But I also want to lob out there the idea that what if the real issue is not the story itself and rewriting it? What if the real issue is our over-identification with the story? And so the idea that we play with, and here's where we go into a little bit more of the mystical Eastern philosophies. Even the Buddhist mind idea or the Hindu non-dual area. One of the very interesting concepts that we start seeing, so again, when we look at the nervous system, for example, I think there's two ways to rewrite it, if you will. One is story by story, meaning let's go back into all the things that might have been imprints, like rewrite that story, find what the imprint is, and retell the story and shift the energy around it, and so on and so forth, so that you can find safety in that story versus a sympathetic response versus a parasympathetic response. And so we kind of shift it that way. Some of the worldwide traditions will say, rather than approaching it imprint by imprint, what if the fundamental thing to rewire is our relationship to self? And so it's a little bit of a metaphor that I like to use, but I believe one of the greatest things we can do is understand ourselves and the difference between me, myself, and I. Because a lot of people think, well, there's the I and then there's a me and the myself, and that's all the same thing in the same person. Now, we don't have to get too deep into that if you don't want today.
I have a couple props that will go great with this.
Okay.
If you want to go deeper with the props.
Okay.
How's that?
Let's see some props.
I think it's perfect.
I'm
timing.
excited.
Yeah.
There's something coming out of the briefcase.
Old school luggage. It kind of, I love it. I got it from a thrift store, but it kind of smells like, you know, like a grandfather's basement. Which so I'll just do it over here.
Okay.
Okay, first prop. This
Okay.
this one first. So
Ooh,
here's a prop.
Okay.
It is clean.
Okay. I like this.
What do you think of with that prop?
So I think this is great because in the concept of me, myself, and I like to say the me is our identity, or what I would call yourself. Now, I think the thing that most people don't recognize, and that I like to say, is like, if I look at this book, or if I look at this thing, or this pen, because I can observe it, it means clearly I'm not the thing that I am observing. I can't be a pen if I'm looking at the pen. So, if you can observe it, then you cannot be it. A great example of this is your eye can observe everything except itself, because it is itself, and so it can observe this. And so, the general rule of thumb is that if I can observe something or have an experience with it, I cannot be the thing, because there needs to be a subject-object relationship. There needs to be the observer and the observed, the knower and the known, or the experience and the experience. So here's where it gets a little trippy if people don't track very closely. And it comes to this. It's self, meaning the mass, the thing that we go out into the world with. Like our body, like the stories around us who make us us, the various things that make up how you would know me as Nick. See, that is an object that can be observed. And so one thing I like to say to get people thinking about that is like when you look in the mirror, you are not what you see, you are the one doing the seeing. If you just let that sit for a second, it's like, well, hold on. Because most of us identify ourselves with our body. And we say, well, I am my body. I'm a 43-year-old, 5'11", half European, half Asian man. And I say that enough to think I'm identified with the body. But if you cut off my hand, am I still there? Of course I'm still there. So my body, am I my body, or is my body something that I can observe? And so that's what I love about this, is that I like to equate it to a VR game. You know, we go to VR, we had a VR studio here in Kelowna that closed down, unfortunately. But you go to the VR game and you put on the headset. And as you put on this headset, you take on the role of the character. Maybe the character is tall or skinny or this or that, or angry or big, or whatever the character is in the game. And the game has to do, the character has to do all these things in a game. Now, if we're not careful, and I did this the other day because I went to Planet Laser with my kids, and I put on this VR roller coaster game, and I mean, it's cartoonish. You know it's not real, but I was getting
Brain processing.
I was getting dizzy, and I was like holding on, and this was clearly a fake game, like it was cartoon on the other side. But imagine you put on a VR headset and you see the character, and what renders in front of you is just another representation of this world, where I see you, I see people, everything looks the same. Very quickly you could forget that you were in a game, and very quickly would you forget that you are not the character playing the game, you're actually the person wearing the VR headset controlling the thing.
Unless you're metacognitive of the awareness of your awareness that you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's most don't have meta-awareness. Most put on the mask and then assume I'm the mask. And they totally forget this is on.
Yeah.
And they function only on the level of me.
They think they're their thoughts. They think they're their beliefs. That's why they get mad at each other. You're that belief that you just had. Well, no, the belief started from the social conditioning or the experience or whatever it is. That person is not their belief system. That belief system is a part of them, but you're the witnesser of your. That's why you can uncondition yourself.
Exactly.
Or unbecome.
Or unbecome. Thank you.
I have another problem.
Sure.
It kind of goes with what you already said anyway.
All right. I like this. I like what's in the secret green briefcase there.
You should be nervous. No, I'm just joking.
Ooh.
There is a saying. Maybe I could have cleaned the mirror.
It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. So that actually very much aligns with almost that saying. It's like when you look in a mirror, are you what you see, or are you the one doing the seeing? And that's talking about the meta-awareness.
What do you see when you look in the mirror?
Depends who's asking.
Right.
So like if there's a couple of levels I see. I see myself. I see the avatar that I play in this world, which is the 5'11", 43-year-old male body. I see that. If I take a step beyond that, then I see the stories that make up this avatar, the conditioning, the social constructs, the parenting, the things that happened that gave me the internal. So I could see the physical, but if you look a little carefully, you can then tap into the non-physical elements that make me me. And then if you're careful enough and good enough, then you can actually see the true essence, the I behind all of that, the one seated in the witness consciousness way, way, way back here that observes it all and puts that into context. And I think we have found that the greatest transformation happens when you can rewire a nervous system towards metaconsciousness, towards witness consciousness.
And homeostasis, maybe.
In what sense?
Well, homeostasis being your natural set point of regulation.
Yes.
So that all systems are firing in cohesion.
Yes.
So, and so, for some, maybe they don't always get to have homeostasis as easily.
Correct.
So they're experiencing non-homeostasis or dysregulation.
Yes.
So what does that mean to you when you're helping people reestablish homeostasis?
Yes.
Do you have tangible tips?
Yeah, well, so I think the couple of things that we look at when we are establishing homeostasis is to experience 4 key areas of the nervous system. So the first one is just down-regulating the nervous system, because it's shown that you can't change, you can't make any modification, you can't do anything if you're in a sympathetic state. If you're in a fight or flight or freeze mode, there's no amount of anything you can do that's going to allow you to transform. So step number 1 is have to get into a parasympathetic state. Actually, the broader term is the ventral vagal state, which is really the true peaceful, calm ability to change. That's when your brain waves are either in alpha or theta versus beta active. It's where your heart and your breath and your brain, what HeartMath calls cohesion, is in coherence. And an easy, simple tip to do that, there's many things you can do. Cold baths help with that. Different types of breathing styles do with that. There's actually humming, because your vagus nerves run through your larynx here just by talking or vibrating or going ah or oh. That's why some ancient traditions, in fact, actually are om. Ohm, they say, is the frequency of the earth when it first started, which could or could not be. I'm not a professional on that. But the very ohm actually vibrates your vagus nerve and brings you into parasympathetic state. But the easiest thing to do that's proven over and over again in all clinical trials and all random testing is what's known as frequency resonance breathing. HeartMath calls it, again, coherence, but the actual term. And all it is realizing that all humans, generally speaking, homeostasis is when your cells frequently vibrate at a 0.1 hertz. When you're off of that, you're not in homeostasis anymore. And the easiest way to do that, again, there's many different ways to do that. But the easiest way to do it right now, that anyone can do tomorrow, or today, or now, is a 4-count inhale through the nose and an extended 6-count exhale through the mouth. And in all studies,
because you're offloading more carbon.
You're offloading more carbon. You are syncing the rhythm of your heart to your breath. And that slows things down. You are stimulating your vagus nerve in that breath pattern. And so when you do that for 10 minutes, studies have shown in 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, your HRV, your heart rate variability, goes up drastically. And all that is a measure of how your body processes stress and their state of homeostasis. And so the first thing is just addressing your vagus nerve. And that's a very simple step that people can do right away. The second thing that someone can do is then addressing this idea of metacognition or meta-awareness. Because the moment we create a little bit of a gap between the story or the experience or the thought or the emotion or the belief and us, that just need a little bit of a gap, then the story and the thought and the belief loses its power over us. Because if we know we're not it, but we're slightly separated from it, just that meta-awareness, again, in neuroscience, is called decentering. It's reworking your self-referential system or your default mode network to say, I'm not the center of the universe, and everything that I experience is not my own. It's things that are coming up in me that I can create distance with. So the practice, for example, the Buddhists will call it self-inquiry in some of the mystical traditions. And all it means is when you're having an experience, if you just sit back and for a very brief moment say who or what is actually having this experience. And it's a prompt. But when you ask that, you say, let's say I'm frustrated or whatever. You say, well, who is frustrated? And you keep asking that question until you come to the fact that, oh, well, like Nick is, but wait a second. Nick is a construct that was made up. Right? It's just all these ideas that have come together. So that if that construct is not as solid as we think it is, then is anyone really frustrated? Or is it just my mind responding because of conditioning and beliefs and so on and so forth? So we create that distance enough for these stories to lose their power a little bit. And now, the first one we're working on the vagus nerve. Now we're working on the default mode network or self-referential system. And the more we can decenter ourselves from the self-referential system, all of a sudden our nervous system can calm down and say, oh, I'm not all my stories. I'm not all my beliefs. I'm not all these things.
You don't overly identify with the emotion.
We don't overly identify with anything for that matter. The emotion or the feeling or the story or the belief or the...
How do you boundary and ensure it doesn't cause depersonalization in kind of an altering state way that wouldn't be preferential?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the short of it is holding everything loosely and recognizing that we're not detaching from anything. We're just creating a gap for our nervous system to breathe. Right? Because I think people can take it so far and then you get into almost nihilism where it's just like, oh, I'm nothing and nothing exists. And what is all this?
It's very Jim Carrey.
Sure.
Circa, whatever that year
was. Yeah. And like, again, you could take that very far if you wanted to dive too. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying create a little space.
Yeah.
Just
well, you're the
space.
sun witnessing the clouds and then you're not attached and then it can go. Oh, why am I'm so frustrated right now because my daughter didn't clean up her room. Okay, I'm just witnessing that come through. Well, really, I just need to breathe and go, oh, I need to ask. I need to ask for her help more. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
Now what's the solution? What do I have power over in this moment?
Exactly.
Right?
And what was cool was, like, I use that example often of like the sky and the clouds, because people can relate to it. Yeah. It's like, hey, if you're the sky, is the sky ever affected by the clouds that pass through? No, the clouds come and they go, and the sky is not affected. Right. They arise and dissolve. And it's even that much more powerful, because I just came back from a trip to Austin the other day. And when you're flying at 35,000 feet, you're always above the clouds. And as we were traveling through, there were spots where you could just see dark patches of clouds and you couldn't see the ground below. And then there's other paths where there's no clouds at all and you can clearly see what's below you. And it's a beautiful reminder that sometimes to be reminded you're the sky and everything else is the clouds, it's just remember sitting in an airplane. Because now you're above all the clouds and you have a far greater perspective that, yeah, I see clouds. Oh, look, it even looks like a storm. But look at me, I'm sitting above I'm sitting above it all. I'm not affected by it. Yeah. I'm affected by it when I'm under them. But if you can keep that mindset of, oh, I am the sky, which means I'm always above the clouds. It gives me that meta awareness. I'm like, oh, I see them. Yeah. And I'm not ignoring the fact that there's a storm there. Clearly there's a storm, but I'm sitting above it so I can create the gap of separation between it. The third thing that I talk about is relational awareness. And so oftentimes there are circuits in us that threat versus safety, isolation versus connection. And so much in the self-help world, we tend to forget that I believe that we need to move from the I, which is the starting point, to the we. Now, it has to start with I, right? The I am and the I awareness and this. But at some point, you need to understand that it's not just like I am knowing, it's we are knowing.
We're social mammals. We're hardwired for love and connection.
Of course we are. Yeah. And there's so many studies that show you lock a kid in a room or whatever without any social contact, like that the
neural connections
they
don't
will
even
shrivel.
grow.
Yeah, it'll be ridiculous. And so one of the things to start, again, there's so many different ways to create that, and having social circles and connecting and physical touch and eye-to-eye contact. Most people can't even look at someone else in the eye, right? These are all helpful. But one of the things that we've proven, again, there's many, 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 many practical tips, but just one of them is, what I say is just bring someone to mind, someone you love, someone you care about, or whatever. And I know this, well, I'll explain it first. You bring someone to mind, and then the easiest way I put it is just send them good vibes, right? And there is science to prove that actually in the sending of good vibes, you're doing them well. But let's pretend that that didn't exist. If that's too woo for you, then pretend that doesn't exist. But something incredible happens where I could be sitting there and thinking of you, Aurora, and just going, I wish Aurora the absolute best. Happiness and peace and prosperity. I wish her an amazing day today. And you may never even hear that. But if I just chime in to my emotional resonance with that, there's a shift internally. And I'm like, oh, like I'm connected. And step one is like just doing that. And you don't have to like make up the emotions you feel or anything, but just feel the little spark that causes. And rewiring is just repeated sparks over and over and over again. And you do that with people you love. And then once you start getting comfortable with that, you start doing that with yourself. And then once you get comfortable with that, then you start doing it with people who you find challenging. That's a harder one.
Or your ops, as the Gen Zs like to say.
yeah. 6, 7. But yeah, but that just is a great starting point to start rewiring the isolation connection circuits and the fear and threat circuits. Because most of the time our fears are based on the reality or the belief that I'm alone on this planet and nobody's here with me. And so like, that's a starting point. Then you start meeting with people. Then you start having real connections. Then you start doing things
Is the world
together.
ready for that yet? For us to be like, okay, let's start this meeting with loving kindness. I mean, the neuroscience does back it. But
100%.
Or societally, I mean, it's not a norm yet. Or if I said, do you love yourself? Like for us to ask each other that.
Yeah, and that's why I think it starts with the self-practice first, of being comfortable doing it on your own, so that when you're faced with another human being, it's not the first time you're like having to feel like you need to connect with that person. Because we live very isolated, and social and all these things keep us with the illusion of connection, because we have a million friends on social and we say hi every so often, but not really connected. But
no, that's like the McDonald's of food, when really you need actual food,
yeah,
right?
real
So
food.
it doesn't really satisfy.
No, exactly.
And you know, I think your work is very important, and entering that space of social love, connection, rewiring, grounding, even bringing that awareness to awareness,
Yes.
and nervous system health and well-being. And I mean, it really is that fire. We need to treat the fire, not the smoke, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so within industries, within mental health, within addictions, it's really noted now, love and connection is the solution. But there's nowhere that we've embedded in our policies or in our procedures yet.
Right.
How do we action that, right?
Yeah.
And so you are a big, you know, anchor point in your work for bringing all those pieces together to say, hey, this is a compilation. This is a way that I've created in a course. So how can people kind of tune in and start to access your work?
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for sharing that. You know, I try to make it as simple as possible and as cost effective as possible. And so like the very foundation of it is something we called Rewired. And I call it a challenge because I was almost inspired by 75 Hard, where people were willing to commit to a few tasks every day for 75 days in order to like personally transform. And I said, I think everybody can commit to doing 4 simple actions every single day as a starting point. It's not going to take you all the way there, but as a starting point. So we have this thing called Rewired. Rewired is a free challenge where anyone's willing to step up and say, I'm willing to dedicate 50 days to a daily practice. It'll only take, 15, 20 minutes a day of things to do, but a daily practice where you can do that. And that is a starting point. Like for me, everyone's got to start 101. Right? And it includes some of the things that we mentioned here. Like can you commit to 10 minutes of resonant frequency breathing? Can you commit to 5 or 10 minutes of a meta-awareness practice? Can you commit 30 seconds to a connection practice? And then the 4th thing we didn't even mention there is oftentimes people disconnect the nervous system with our physical body, but our physical body is very much part of our nervous system. And so things like understanding our circadian rhythms, trying to get 8 hours of sleep a night is very beneficial to our nervous system. Sweating for at least 20 minutes a day, doing something that just gets you moving rather than being stuck in a chair, which most of us do. Getting proper light, getting proper nutrition. Again, there's very simple ways to, and I call that stabilizing. So if the first thing is priming the nervous system with the breathing, then we're training the nervous system with meta-awareness. Then we're balancing the nervous system with the connection element. And lastly, we're stabilizing it with bringing our physicality and our somatics into it and having a somatic experience with our nervous system as well. Now you have the formula for really starting to fundamentally rewire for change. Now, that's not to say that if there's some really deeply embedded traumas and some work to need to be done, it's not, let's just be clear, it's not going to go away because you're doing a few breathing practices. But if you can start getting into a ventral vagal state where you just feel better more often, and then you feel safer as a result more often, well, now you're primed to be able to do the deeper work, however you're doing it. So if you're doing it with a therapist or whatever means you're doing your trauma-informed work, now you have the groundwork to allow that to happen more easily rather than feel like you're always bumping up against the wall. And so our Rewired challenge is to invite anybody to start there. If they want to go further, then we have our Unbecoming course, which is embedded information, including all these modalities and going a little bit further for those who want to go even further. And then, of course, we have our 2-month container that we call Awaken with 5, and that's where we bring in molecules to help support this process as well.
Okay, I've heard of that. So if people want to hear more deeply about what you talk about,
Sure.
I mean, you've got lots of stuff out there. How can they access that? I'm sure something struck, piqued interest in some way in the episode. So where
Sure.
would they go to
I
that?
think the easiest place to go is unbecoming.movie.
Okay.
And what that does is it brings you to a place where it shows you the documentary film we're working on, talks about all the various work that we're doing. You can sign up for the challenge for free as well. You can learn about our course. You can learn about any programs that we have going on. It'll connect to my social channels if you want to follow on social. But like it's a great starting point to kind of just have a foray into the way that I approach the work. And I'm not the only way to approach the work, and there's many beautiful people doing different things, but it's kind of the beginning of how we approach the work.
Yeah, I'm so glad you came on today. So just closing that arc of our kind of time together.
Sure.
What is one thing that you hope for? You know, you pivoted, you transformed into this space of transformation. What's your hoped for outcome from this? Like if this is like, has the outcome that you hope for humanity, what would that be?
I forgot who said it, and I wish I could give them credit. But there's a quote that says, like, the difficult experience is unavoidable, but suffering is optional. And oftentimes, I think it might have even been Viktor Frankl that says, your way out of suffering is just minding the gap between the trigger and the response, the experience and how you see the experience. There's a little gap there. And if I could dream really big, the biggest endeavor is to bring an end to human suffering. Now, when I say human suffering, I just mean internal suffering. But I feel like if you can solve the internal suffering, maybe that bleeds into the external suffering, the wars and the famines and all the things that are happening there. But I truly believe that on this planet, we've been given all the gifts and all the tools and all the resources and all the people from so many different experiences and blends of life to be able to give us everything we need to navigate our inner worlds. And if we can bring an end to suffering, even to just a better degree than now, that's the big vision. That's where we're hoping to go with this whole thing. Very cool. I have a very similar vision, so. Well, then we'll team up on it. That's right. Okay, well, thank you so much. Oh, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation. I appreciate it.